Of course, over in the States, Kamala Harris made an emotional concession speech last night. She was urging her supporters to keep fighting following her crushing defeat in the election.
A lot of people saw that speech and thought, oh, I wish we'd seen more of that.
Yeah, well, that's
Funny,
often the case when people are defeated, isn't it?
It is, or they leave office, yeah. Well, meanwhile, Donald Trump is busy assembling his top team. Could Elon Musk secure a key role in government? Susanna and Ed, of course, are there in Washington, D.C. Good morning. I'm sure there's much talk of all of those things. And how is it in the capital there?
It's very quiet at 1:30 in the morning, isn't it? But it has been very quiet overall since Trump's victory, despite all of those barricades and the huge amounts of security and the fears that if Kamala became the first female president and beat Donald Trump, then all of his supporters might turn up and protest. Of course, he won. And the Kamala Harris supporters are in tears at a concession speech, aren't they, of hers? There is genuine fear, I think, amongst many Democrat supporters about a second Trump presidency. And you saw there in the headline in the Daily Mirror that there's concern about what he's going to do, how he might consolidate his power, how he might take revenge on his enemies, those who have criticised him, just what he might do, particularly with trade, putting tariffs on imports which might affect UK trade in particular. But do you think those fears are justified? Do you think there's an exaggeration of who President Trump is and the threat he poses?
I think genuinely nobody knows. As Richard said, we were all thinking that we may be waiting days to find out who is going to win the election, and that certainty has suddenly arrived unexpectedly. Donald Trump has won very clearly. He is the next president. But what's he going to want to do with it? We know that he wanted to avenge losing in 2020. He thought he was robbed. We know that he wants to escape being convicted and sent to jail, and now he's president. All that gets kicked into the long grass. We know he was worried about his financial affairs, and while he's president, that is still OK. But what is his purpose now? What does he want to change in America or around the world? And I think in capitals, we saw it earlier with Keir Starmer saying, you know, I stand ready to work with you. But what does he want to do? Does he want a trade war with China and Europe? Does he want to make concessions to Putin in Ukraine? Yeah. Is he going to back Netanyahu against the Palestinians in the West Bank and say, you know, get on with it? That's fine. Biden was trying to hold Netanyahu back. We don't know. Is he going to say to the religious right here in America who've backed him in this election, I will now, with my administration, back the changes you want to see, for example, on abortion laws? All these things are unknown. Is he fundamentally motivated by re-election in 4 years' time? Under the current constitution, he can't have a third term. Donald Trump is going to be pretty frustrated about that, but is he thinking about one of his kids taking over? Elon Musk is not an American citizen, but, you know, you wouldn't rule it out.
Also, the other thing that's interesting is this relationship between Sir Keir Starmer and the UK government and Donald Trump, because, of course, it's slightly awkward, isn't it? Because we were given the impression by Downing Street that this phone call was made and it was very warm and, you know, really good, sort of emphasising that meeting they had back in September. But there's a couple of things which have gone unmentioned, one of which is what the Foreign Secretary David Lammy had previously said about Donald Trump, describing him as a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath and a tyrant in a toupee. Yeah. Now he's going to be the next president. It feels a little bit like, should he say, I'm really sorry that I said that about you? Or is it just all water under the bridge?
That was a few years ago.
Yeah. David Lammy, I'm not sure I'd forget if somebody said that about me.
And I think Donald Trump is not the kind of guy who forgets. David Lammy's been working very hard in the last few months to build bridges, particularly with Vice President J.D. Vance, although the fact the Labour Party was caught out, kind of seemingly officially sending delegations of staff from the Labour Party to campaign against Trump. Trump may not be so bothered. He won.
Yeah.
But the Trump team are not going to forget that.
No. But luckily, in British politics, we have a kind of Superman who's offered himself up as sort of coming to the rescue. And that, of course, is the MP for Clacton, the leader of Reform UK.
Not been doing surgeries in Clacton in the last couple of days?
No, he's been out here at Mar-a-Lago and also broadcasting. But he said that he'll do whatever's necessary to sort of bridge the gap between the two parties. Let's have a listen to what Nigel Farage said.
I think I could help smooth the relationship between Trump, the people he's going to appoint into senior roles in the administration, most of whom I also know. If I could be helpful as a bridge between the two, I would do it. And it's not because I agree with anything the Labour government stands for. I do it because it's in our national interest.
He also referenced those rather awkward comments by some members of the Labour government. Let's have a listen.
Things have been said by British leading Labour politicians in government about him that were pretty horrible. That won't disappear overnight. But the one thing I've learned, knowing Trump over the years, is he does forgive people. So look, this relationship can be mended, and it must be mended. Our trade relationship with America is vital, and if they're going to start putting tariffs on overseas products, we need a negotiation. We've got to start rolling out the red carpet now.
What we're wondering here is whether this is a job application to be the formal ambassador between the UK government and President Trump.
That would be quite an appointment. The current ambassador, Dame Karen Pierce, due to stand down. There's been speculation about whether, a politician might be appointed by Keir Starmer, Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson's name in the frame, David Miliband. But Nigel Farage is saying, look, Peter Mandelson, David Miliband, they don't know Donald Trump like I do.
Well, that's true.
And more than that, if the Labour Party's got some difficulties, but the special relationship is important, put somebody in who can really, really broker between Downing Street and the White House. Look like a job application to me. Whether he can double hat between being the MP for Clacton and Her Majesty's ambassador, or His Majesty's ambassador in Washington, I'm not sure. Which job would he choose if he had a choice?
They do have a lot in common, though, don't they? Of course, not just that they're friends. Because, Richard, you talk about the polls getting it wrong. And if you just think back to 2016, it was such a seismic political year because Donald Trump defied the polls and beat Hillary Clinton to become president of the United States. And, of course, the EU referendum, Nigel Farage defied the polls and the Out campaign won. So, he knows voters in the same way that Donald Trump does. They've got a lot in common.
They both think of themselves as disruptors, don't
Absolutely,
they?
yeah.
And I guess in the case of both of those
Or the
events
voice
you
of the
talk
people.
about. Yeah, yeah.
I think what's really on this side of the pond, I think the broad question is how could... OK, we get the result, but how could the Americans have voted a man like that as their president? And I saw the most extraordinary clip, which I thought summarised the answer to that question on one of the news channels yesterday. I think it was an American network at about 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. And it was a British TV reporter, and he stuck his microphone, they're doing vox pops, street interviews, into the face of a blue-collar a small business owner. A guy runs a car repair workshop in Detroit. And the reporter said to him, how could you have voted a man like that as your president? And this was the answer. I wrote it down. He said, you guys over there in England, you just don't get it. Sure, we know that Trump is a jerk. I knew that Trump was a jerk when I voted for him yesterday. But he's our jerk. And even jerks can get things done. I'm something of a jerk myself, but I run a great little business here in Detroit. And that seems to me to summarise the disconnect between our conception of what's happened and what they know about it in America.
Well, we had Boris Johnson on a similar basis in 2019.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, look, the voters want people with character.
Not that I'm saying Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage are jerks.
Whatever you
quickly clarify.
Whatever you think.
But people who connect with people in that way, yeah.
And whatever else you think about Trump, he is a character. He's a forceful personality.
Yes.
That people, recognise.
And Americans don't vote in quite the way that we do in Europe, do they? They vote on the bottom line, the economy, the economy. And, here's Trump, who's clearly a misogynist and a physical abuser of women, and yet millions of women voted for him. He was racist about Kamala, openly racist, to a black audience. People of colour, in their millions, voted for him. He is a convicted felon, and yet millions of law-abiding, law-respecting Americans voted for him. They go for the bottom line.
Because people felt worse off.
Exactly.
I think that was the main thing. And also, I think the perception was that his enemies, the Democrats, were going after him in the law courts.
Yeah.
And as soon as that started, he got boosted in the primaries. Because I remember at one point, they didn't even think he was going to win the Republican primary. But then when all these law cases and lawfare, they call it, happened, a lot of his base just rallied around him.
But isn't it strange, though, because you would think that being involved in a legal case... I mean, look at what happened with the Conservative Party when various cases of breaking COVID rules. People reacted against that.
That's right.
Whereas that caused people to think... And that, to me, says that there's a lot of distrust of authority and all its forms.
And it's very
if you
polarised.
distrust authority and someone else is distrusting it, you immediately feel an allegiance.
And he was such a totemic figure, and people sort of identified with him. His base were totally fanatically dedicated to him.
Yeah.
And so anyone who attacked him in whatever way, the base just supported him more.
I know, but I just put the brakes on here a little bit now. You've got to remember. But 48% of Americans voted against him. Right? He's won fair and square on the system.
Popular vote as well as...
He's won, yes, he's won it, but it's the margin. So let's not pretend the whole of America wants him. He's won. I'm not disputing that. And his opponents, Harris and the Democrats, have accepted the result. If it had gone the other way, he and some of his supporters would not be accepting that result. But he has won. But the key reason he won is people felt worse off.
I agree with that.
And the lesson here for Labour, for Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, if we get to 2029 and people feel worse off, Labour is going to be in trouble. People want to feel better off.
OK, well, look, he said he's going to deliver on his promises. Shall we have a look at some of those and how it impacts us over here? Because, you know... everybody feels a bit, whoa, don't they? Because he is such a big and colourful figure. But actually, it's his second time around. He's learned a lot. He's more experienced. People shouldn't prejudge what he delivers on this time around, should they? So there's been a lot of talk of tariffs and this promise that he is going to take a step and immediately make... big tariffs, 10% tariffs on anything coming in from outside the US. You can see how all US manufacturers would think, great.
Yes.
What does it mean for us?
I think it could be very bad because we need to grow the economy. Rachel Reeves' budget was ostensibly all about that.
Yeah.
And if you have tariffs that damage us or Europe, then it's much harder to grow the economy in that context. But I think with Trump, you've got to understand that he's a businessman and a deal maker. That's how he sees himself. And I think it's very much the start of a conversation. So when he says to China, I'm going to put 60%, that's just a signal to them to say, let's get around the table and talk. I don't think he necessarily is going to do that on day one.
I want to ask a question that pitches us forward 4 years from now. Is he going to turn into a dictator? Because he himself said in his campaign that if you voted for him this time, you need never vote again. And Oprah Winfrey...
It's going to be like Putin.
Right,
Oprah Winfrey keeps changing the rules.
And Oprah Winfrey, in one of her speeches 2 days ago in support of Harris, said, if you vote this guy in, that's it. He'll be there until he dies. Is that a likely possibility that he'll cling on after 4 years?
It's a danger. There's a 2-term limit.
I agree.
In America, you'd have to change the Constitution.
Exactly. Well, will he do that?
I think it's very hard to do that. I mean, to change a Constitution, it's not just a majority of the House. You need, or the states. It's a 2/3 threshold. So I don't see how he can do that. And I know the Democrats are saying this is the end of democracy, but I literally cannot see how one man in 4 years can subvert.
So that's all hot air.
To me, that is, but other people had a genuine concern.
Unless, of course, he gets voted back, because that's always a possibility of talk.
But the Constitution
couldn't legally stand.
He can't stand again. This is his second term, but that's it.
So that's where you'd have to change the law.
Yeah.
But does he just say, 2 fingers to the law? He's so unpredictable. And in a democracy, you require losers' consent.
That's right.
We didn't have that 4 years ago from him, and that's what makes him a real threat.
Can we just stay a little bit with now? Some of the other promises made is no wars in my time. Now, we know that Ukraine and Zelensky both think, what does that mean for us? Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, are saying, well, actually, that might be good for us here in Israel. What are your thoughts? Because obviously both affect the rest of the world.
So, look, with Israel, I think Netanyahu is very pleased. He actually said Trump was the best friend of Israel ever to be president.
I think there's posters actually in Jerusalem saying, now let's make Israel great again, with pictures of Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
You know?
That's indicative
they're very
of...
pleased.
They're very pleased.
Yeah.
They're very pleased.
Yeah.
I think Putin is probably quite pleased. Although my view with Putin is that he's not going to just let Putin get what he wants.
No.
He's not going to do... There'll be a deal. You know, he'll extract something if there is such a deal.
Yeah, but
and will that be good for Ukraine or good for the US?
Yeah, but is the deal surrender your territory to Russia? 20% that's been occupied and was seized the Crimea back in 2014. I think it's really bad for the Palestinian people.
Yes.
But when he was president last time, he moved the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is other countries, including Britain, don't have their embassies in Jerusalem because it's divided, part occupied, and international.
Very briefly, because we're almost out of time, do we think this election might, I hope the answer to this is yes, see the end of the celebrity endorsement? Because it's all very well. People are happy to buy people's records, listen to their songs, go to their concerts, watch their films, but they hate being told what to think by celebrities.
I've never understood why the Democrats do this. I mean, the fact that Beyoncé or Taylor Swift are going to vote for Kamala Harris. I mean, who in their right mind is thinking, well, Beyoncé's going to vote for her, so I will? I don't think people think like that.
Swifties might definitely go.
There were whole Swifties for Trump.
It shows the limits of them. But, of course, he had his own celebrity endorsements.
Hulk.
We had the whole...
couldn't get his T-shirt.
He had the US Open winner, the golfer. He had a cage fight.
Elon Musk.
No, but the issue
and his
there is that a lot of people feel alienated by the whole Hollywood glitz. I mean, if your thing is, I'm going to talk to normal people, having multi-millionaire celebrities...
floating down from their mansions on the Hollywood Heights and then floating back up again.
It's not going to help.
But I think it's always been overrated. They like them as adornments.
Well, it did no good this time, did it?
No, you're right.
OK, thank you both very much.
We love your celebrity endorsement of our show. So thanks very much indeed. It does us a lot of good, doesn't it, Richard?
It does. We just want a Niagara of praise.